Realistically, what's a realistic time frame for going from 0 to 60 on this, to preparing your company? You make the decision today that you want to prepare your company for sale. How long realistically do they need to plan for to get it to a point where they can actually pull the trigger on it?
That timeline varies a lot between companies. It's a good idea to start as far ahead as you can, particularly if you're benchmarking value and putting in a strategy to improve that value. You need the time to do that. You also may have some tax structuring considerations that you want to look at even 5 to 7 years ahead, and things like that. So it's a good idea to have a business plan for how am I going to eventually get the value out of my largest asset, and very few business owners have that. It's less than 30%. The ones that do tend to get better value out of their companies just because they're working towards that value. As far as the actual timeline, once you decide to sell, it can have a number of factors. One of the things that we do and that Scott does on the legal side is some pre-sale diligence, and we look at where are the skeletons in the closet, or what are things that have to be fixed, and depending on what needs to be fixed, it can take a while. We may say, well, you're not, for example, we had a construction company, construction-related company that wasn't tracking project costs from an accounting basis. Well, any buyer is going to be interested in being able to see which projects were profitable and which aren't. So that was a situation where we knew we were going to have at least 6 months of putting in costing, both historically and on a going forward basis, so that buyers could really evaluate what was happening. So you can have those kinds of things. You can find legal things in there that you need to fix, and you need to allow for that. The actual process, I think, is going to be faster now than it has been for the last couple of years. There was obviously great difficulty in getting financing, and people were spending a lot of time on diligence, assuming that things potentially during the downturn were only going to get worse and prices would only get better if you were a buyer. That is not the case now with as many buyers competing for companies as there are. I think the process will go faster. I think as a good rule of thumb, though, it's still reasonable to plan to spend at least a year doing it. You know, we'd hope that we could have a transaction within 6 months, but again, you're never sure about how long financing is going to take, or particularly some of the legal things that you're going to come up with in the process.
Ken, I have a question for you.
Can I just comment on that, Steve? And this is a plug for our industry, but I think it's very important, regardless of the timing, is to have a financial advisor on your team. You'll know that once the deal is done, you'll be inundated with help, brother-in-laws, everybody running out of the woodwork to manage your money. So get your team around you as you can contemplate this transaction, because life after the transaction will be quite complicated.
As a wealth manager, Ken, let's walk this process forward. So now a company owner is on the verge of recapitalizing or selling his or her business. This is a once-in-a-lifetime moment. He or she has worked most of their adult lives to get to that point, and here comes the payout. As a wealth manager, what is going through their minds, and how do you help him or her sort out their priorities for putting that wealth to use for the rest of their lives?
Very, very big decision, and one that does take a lot of pre-planning. It takes a really good understanding what that after-tax amount of money will be and what it will likely generate by way of realistic returns into the future, because that is the life's work, that is the legacy, and that is the dream. And it's from that dream concept, each individual will want to decide who and how they can fit people into their dream to help them take the proceeds forward. We always ask a lot of questions about the family involvement, the legacy, the planning, and work closely with our clients to make sure that their dreams are aligned with what the wealth will do in the next life.
This is a question for all of you. For the mindset of the company owner making that decision as to whether to recapitalize their company and take some money off the table or to sell it outright, what criteria should the company owner use to make that decision?
I think that the biggest one is what you expect to happen with the value of the company going forward. If you're recapitalizing, generally you're leaving some money on the table. You're taking out a good chunk, but you're anticipating that you're going to have nice growth from the company, and you'd like to participate in that growth 5 to 7 years down the road and effectively get another kick at the cat. So it's an investment decision as to do I want to continue to do this? And some of that goes into personal decisions about how involved do I want to be in the company going forward. Some people are ready to retire and move on, but generally if you're going to leave a significant amount of money in the company, you're going to want to be involved in the company and making sure that it does well. And that's usually the incentive for the private equity group that's recapitalizing, that you have just as big an incentive as they do to grow the company. So it's a lifestyle decision and it's an investment decision, but it is often a way to think about, well, I can get some money off the table, I can diversify my assets, invest them in something else, and I'm still going to enjoy working in my company and continuing to build it and do well with it.
Yeah, I would add to Jim's comments two things. When you're working with a family-owned company, in addition to the typical non-monetary type of lifestyle decisions, particularly when you're talking about intergenerational transitions and a founder's desire to transition the business potentially through a future refinancing back to a second generation, that adds some complexity to the equation of a recapitalization. The other big point is if you're going to recapitalize with a financial partner, you've got to have somebody that shares your vision. Vision isn't a legal concept, but it drives a lot of legal concepts like how do you share management decision making, how do you make decisions about collectively exiting. Those are, I think, are two key points when you're thinking about a recapitalization.
What about the taking 2 bites out of the apple or a second kick out of it, taking money off the table at some point and then ultimately in growing the company and ultimately then selling it outright? Is that something that you're seeing more of, or is that becoming a realistic and viable option for many company owners?
I think what I'm seeing in the marketplace, and I think we talked a little bit about the climate we just went through, but in 2008 scared a lot of us, and scaring people with their single biggest asset, their business. The planning has to start. I'm not going through that again with all of my eggs in one basket. So ESOPs, recaps, partial new equity infusions are all ways to lessen that exposure to that one single business risk.
Well, I think with the liquidity crunch that we've experienced the last couple of years, the recapitalization transaction lends itself really well for a private company that has an expectation of future growth but can't get liquidity from typical financing sources, and a recapitalization structure can allow you to achieve that.
I think Scott's reference to vision is really important. If you've got a vision that your company is going to continue to grow, and you feel pretty confident in that vision, then getting that second kick at the cat is good. And we do hear the success stories of people who've taken more off with a smaller percentage of the company the second time than they did the first time. But again, it's got all the business risk behind it, and you've got to be pretty comfortable and confident that you're going to continue to achieve what you're setting out to do. And you can tell when you talk to business owners and you've got multiple offers on the table, and you ask them, you know, what's the comfort in your projections? And you can see which way they're going to go by whether they accept an all-cash deal or some mixture of seller financing and equity where they're investing in the company going forward.
Ken mentioned ESOPs, employee stock ownership plans. Scott, maybe a question for you. A company owner, how does he or she go about exploring whether or not that is an option when I suppose you would have to ask your employees, would you be interested? And that could be problematic going forward if, in fact, then you decided not to do it. Could you walk us through the process of the pitfalls that might be in going forward in a transaction like that?
Well, using an ESOP to facilitate a change in control transaction is a concept that's not new. I think it really goes to the cultural values of the group that wants to buy it or the current ownership group. I mean, you're really sharing ownership control with your employee group. And while they may not have significant voting rights, if you're an owner that wants to instill ownership type values and try to align the workforce's culture with that of owners, that will make it a successful transaction. If you're an owner that isn't open in communicating with your workforce, that's not a transaction. I think that really will work very well, and you won't drive the benefits that you might anticipate.
What about a management buyout? Are there similar complications with that?
Tied to an ESOP transaction?
No, a straight management buyout of a company for a company owner wanting to explore that option of whether his management team is interested in buying out the company.
Well, the potential complication with a management-led buyout is they need a source of capital if they don't have the personal net worth to get to a closing. And you see management-led buyouts coupled with financial partners pretty regularly. That is a form that many transactions take, and it actually is for family-owned businesses where you don't have a next generation ready and willing to step in. A very viable way for a founder to realize an exit.
Let's go to a straight strategic buyout. A company owner wants to explore selling his or her company to possibly a competitor in the marketplace. That also has complications in that if the transaction does not go forward, now you've given away a lot of your trade secrets, your intellectual property in many ways. How do you help company owners through that process?
Well, I mean, the fundamental question is picking the party that you're going to talk to about selling your company to based on their reputation. If you're going to talk to a competitor, it ought to be a competitor that has a stellar reputation from a business ethics standpoint, because you are putting yourself at risk. I mean, there are some legal protections that you can try to build into the process, certainly having a strong confidentiality agreement and staging the delivery of competitive data during the due diligence process. But at the end of the day, you have to have an extremely high amount of trust with the competitor that you're talking to.
We're often asking, when we contact those competitors, just talking to the CEO and saying, we'd like to keep this just at your level. We're really working to keep this quiet. We're providing generally all the financial information that they need up front, but we're certainly not providing any customer data other than with a number for that customer 1, 2, 3. We're maybe providing an org chart, but it doesn't have names or that kind of thing. So we're restricting the data that's being shared, and until you're past the letter of intent stage, you're really not sharing anything that isn't pretty either generally financial or anything that's proprietary as to your customers, your vendors, or your employees.